About rights of citizens as well as responsibilities, just kind of carrying on with it. And so several things that we'll see. First off, naturalization, immigrant, alien, and deport. So this is all about the process of immigration today. And I wanted to think, what does citizenship mean to you? And can you lose that right? You can revoke that right, and you can lose that right. And do you believe that's a right that the government should possess? So, there are two ways to become a citizen in this country. I was fortunate enough to have been born here. Ergo, my process was easy. Having our son recently, we processed the paperwork for his birth certificate before we left the hospital. His birth certificate was mailed to us within 30 days. He is now a citizen of the United States. Yay, go Avery. Well, for some of you who came here, or your families came here, it's not such a simple process, right? It can take decades. Some people go their entire lives waiting to become a citizen. So once more, yay. My son was born at Mission Hospital. Within 30 days, he is a bona fide American citizen. I think they even give you some kind of paper about he's a citizen technically until the paper comes. So, easy peasy if you're born here. The process of naturalization, that is the legal process to obtain citizenship, takes much longer. You can also hold dual citizenship. For example, that you move permanently to Canada. I mean, Whistler in British Columbia is incredible. It's one of those outdoor meccas that I could see myself living in. Who knows, maybe retire there someday. But it is just one of those bucket list places that you go there and you're like, oh my gosh, I've arrived. This is the place that I need to be. I could just about live there and be happy. So maybe someday when I retire, I'll go to Whistler in British Columbia and I will become a citizen of Canada. This is all hypothetical. I actually really like where I am, but let's say I do that. Now, I have a couple of options. I could apply for dual citizenship. That is, I could be a citizen of both the United States and a citizen of the United States, or a citizen of the United States and Canada, excuse me. I could retain my American citizenship, and I could apply for a permanent residence status. That's another idea. Or I could renounce my U.S. citizenship and then become a citizen of Canada. Those are all the different options I have. Now, let's say when I'm retired, I choose to have another child, which, don't hold your breath, but let's say I choose to do that, at which point I have dual citizenship. Well, then my child would have dual citizenship. Actually, we have some friends who are in that situation. They're both citizens of Canada and the United States. So are their kids. It's a neat story. Okay, so what if you are living in this country, you are not a citizen, you are not a permanent resident, and I don't mean offense by this, but the legal term is alien. We tend to use undocumented immigrant, but alien is the legal term. So, what is an alien? That is simply a non-citizen. A non-citizen. So, you're in this country, you are not a citizen. You could either be an illegal alien, again, that's the term, or you could be a resident, perhaps with a visa, maybe a work visa, maybe a long-term visa, but you are still not a citizen. The legal term once more is alien. So how do you get from alien to citizen? Well, first you have to formally declare your intention. You have to have lived in the United States for a set period of time. And then perhaps after a very long waiting period, like Con was saying, from '02 until this year, you might finally get to interview and take your citizenship exam. And so the exam itself, you can find it online. I made a B on it for what it's worth, so you could take it and give it a go if you want to. It's not easy, and you're going to have to study for it for a really long time to get the same right that Avery got by virtue of opening his eyes. So it's a complicated process. And then finally, you've passed the exam, you've made it through, they've checked your criminal status, they've checked to see if you have any communicable diseases, they've checked everything that they can think to check, then you get to take the oath of allegiance. There is a formal oath of allegiance. It's a little longer than the Pledge of Allegiance, but it's the same basic stuff. So you take the oath of allegiance, and congratulations, you are a citizen of the United States. Now, in 1927, the Indian Reorganization Act was passed. It wasn't until 1927 that Native Americans were made citizens of the United States. A commissioner on Indian Affairs was appointed, and it also began the process of granting greater autonomy to Native American reservations and giving the right that Americans already enjoyed to Native Americans. Now, how can you lose your citizenship? Number one, you could have improperly obtained it. A lot of employers are required to use E-Verify. That means they have to check the citizenship status of the people they employ. And there are lots of people who need a job and could be tempted to scam that system and to obtain documentation illegally. And so they could be permanently denied their citizenship. There's a great risk that comes along with forging those documents. You can also become an expatriate. Ernest Hemingway was a famous expatriate. He served in the First World War. He suffered severe PTSD from the experiences he encountered there. A lot of his later writings were influenced by that. In fact, he later committed suicide, perhaps from the depression that he suffered as a result of the war. There was no DSM back then. No one really understood what PTSD was, so he dealt with it by delving deep into alcoholism and drug use. His is a sad story, but he left us some incredible writing. Now, he also, in disgust of his experiences in the war, renounced his American citizenship. He resided in Key West in Florida, which is the southernmost point of the United States, basically as far as he could get while still living in the United States. But he spent most of his time traveling the world, particularly in France and Spain, and he renounced his American citizenship. You can also get in trouble and lose your citizenship. These are crimes of extreme disloyalty. Like maybe trying to help an enemy of the United States hurt the United States in some way. The famous case from the Revolutionary War is Benedict Arnold, who actually turned against the American colonists and began fighting for the British. Of course, the concerns here with the Russian meddling. If there were American citizens involved in the Russian meddling in the United States 2016 election, well, those individuals are guilty of treason, the highest crime. And they could be expatriated as part of their punishment. They could lose their citizenship. So, I'm assuming you all have different views about the naturalization process. For those of you who have experienced it, you understand that it is not a simple one. Keep it at that. Okay, now, even though there is a process for the legal naturalization of immigrants into the country, the reality is that millions of people come to this country illegally every year. And that's the reality that we live in. So, there are restrictions. So why are they coming illegally? Why can't they just fill out the paperwork at the border and come on in? It doesn't work that way. Because you see, there are restrictions on the number of immigrants that can enter the United States. And I want to define immigrant as a person who moves permanently to a new country. This is not temporary work status. If you work summer jobs around here, you may have encountered folks from all over the world because they'll come here to live and work on a temporary visa. It's great for employers because they don't have to pay them as much. It's great for them because if they want to go into international business, they need to live in the United States to practice their English. So it's a win-win for both. But that's a temporary visa. They usually get visas for about 3 months. 2 months of hard work, maybe 2.5, and then they'll travel for a couple weeks and they got to go home to wherever they're from. Now, the United States accepts around 2/3 of a million people every year. Roughly 675,000 people are legally accepted into the country each year. Now, the rules regarding immigration have changed a lot. For example, the Immigration Act of 1990 shifted the priority for immigration from people related to U.S. citizens to people with special skills, creating basically a merit-based system. So if you're an engineer living in Zimbabwe and you want to move to New Jersey, you're going to be given preferential treatment. Why? Because your skill set is considered valuable to the country. Now, if you are a store clerk, you might have a more difficult time. Now, there's about 12 million people living in this country illegally. 12 million. Now, how did they get here? Most of these people were temporary visitors that outstayed their visa. They didn't hop across some imaginary wall. That's really not how folks are getting to this country illegally. For example, there was a young man about 2 years ago that worked at Green River Adventures. I don't remember his name. He was fascinating. He was from Nepal. He was a Sherpa before he came here. He actually helped carry the packs on expeditions for mountaineering trips. I mean, just lived like way up there. His home was way above the tree line. And to get to the airport, to fly here, it took him several days of travel. First by pack mule or llama, and then by bus, and then finally he got to places where there were roads and got to the airport. Well, he worked here, and even though he made very little, I mean, he was just, kind of minimum wage employee at Green River Adventures. To him, that was a ton of money. To his family, he was sending most of it back to his family. And then after his visa expired, he had to go home. Now, for that young man, any amount of money that he was making here was exponentially greater than any amount of money he was going to make back home. So imagine, and he's sending, and he was your age, imagine this, and mature enough and worldly enough, had lived a hard life, and he understood that he needed to send most of the money he made all the way back there. He just got it, which I admired this young man. And imagine the temptation. And he did go home, by the way. He did, he had to. But imagine the temptation for that young man to overstay his visa. As complicated and dangerous as that may be, but imagine what he could do for his family working here. Now understand that temptation. And understand that he would, staying here legally, he would have to work in God knows what type of area, with very little to no oversight or supervision. He might have to accept deprivations and hardships and mistreatments. But if it meant helping his family to that degree, he might be willing to take that risk. So that's where a lot of these folks come from. So many do cross borders illegally. I mean, U.S. Border Patrol is often underfunded. I mean, the amount of manpower it would take to effectively police our multi-thousands of miles of border on both sides as well as the oceans. Can you imagine? That's a task, guys. That's a task. I mean, I went to the beach this summer. Anybody else go to the beach? Did you see patrol boats along the horizon? That means somebody could have slipped in. For all you knew, somebody coming in off the beach going, yay, that was fun. Who knows, right? To effectively patrol our entire border, we're not just talking about a wall. I mean, we're talking about an extremely expensive infrastructure to effectively do it. More than you're willing to pay. More than I'm willing to pay. Now, a wall serves as a symbol, sure, that's kind of a buzzword lately. But to actually do it, to make it foolproof, would be close to impossible. So the reality is that people are going to be able to cross the border, even though what you need to understand is that most people who come here illegally are just overstaying visas. But yes, people do. And then finally, expired legal permits. But here's the reality. If you are in that situation, this is not something you flippantly do. You don't just go, "Mwahahaha, I'm going to get those liberals and I'm going to hop across the border." No, you're doing this generally out of desperation. That young man from Nepal. He would be tempted to do that because I can't imagine the situation his family's living in above the tree line at 13,000 feet or higher, way up in the middle of nowhere, probably in a shack, a yurt of some type. I can't imagine. And so what if staying here for a year illegally allowed him to save up enough money to send so his family could go live in a town and have heat? I mean, if the difference is barely surviving in heat, then absolutely we would take that risk. So the risk, obviously, is being deported. You could be arrested. It is a crime to cross into this country illegally. And you could be required to leave, sent back to your own country, and never allowed. Okay, so it is the job of the United States Border Control to work the borders of the United States between Mexico and Canada, as well as the surrounding coastal waters. So using, radar and sonar, the Coast Guard does a good job of patrolling our borders. I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying that these are huge borders we're talking about. And so it is a monumental task of the U.S. Border Patrol to guard these borders. This is not a simple process. So they've got a big job. Okay, but let's say that you're like Khan's family and residing here legally. There is a process for that, and then there is a protocol for that. There are different categories of legal aliens. I would assume they had permanent residency status. There are also non-resident aliens. That means they're dwelling here temporarily. You see a lot of folks like this in the summer. Guarantee you go to Green River Adventures, you're going to hear someone with a Kiwi accent because they hire lots of folks from New Zealand. I love that accent. Guarantee Isaac's probably still working there. and you can probably hear that accent. He's a non-resident alien. At the end of every summer, he goes back to New Zealand. There are also refugees. Now, of course, a lot of the heartbreak associated with the detaining of children were people who were applying to come here in a refugee status, and they were being detained until the processes could be complete. But yes, people do apply for refugee status and come to the United States. Thousands of Jewish immigrants applied for refugee status during the Second World War. We accepted 100,000 and we told the rest to go away. True story. A number of Syrian refugees applied for refugee status. We accepted a certain number and told the rest to go away. Now, if you are an alien living in the United States, it doesn't mean you are an illegal alien. I just told you there's different categories of legal residency. You still have rights, but there are restrictions. You may not vote. You may not run for political office. You can't serve on juries. You can't work in government jobs. I mean, I had to produce a copy of my birth certificate to work here. And also, you have to carry your identification on you at all times. Which, here's the difference. Let's say my ID's in my backpack, but I don't generally have it with me. But here's kind of the tricky business of the U.S. Border Patrol. Just want to be honest. I'm not going to be likely suspected of being an illegal immigrant, mainly because of my race. If my skin tone were a different color, then I would be more concerned and more likely to have my ID on me, just because of my race. Yes, profiling is real. And so, yes, whether you are a citizen of the United States or whether you are not, the sad reality is that your race is likely to relate to your level of anxiety about dealing with law enforcement. If I'm pulled over and I don't have my ID on me, they can look it up. They probably won't even pull me out of the vehicle. I'll just have to say I don't have my ID on me. But if I were of a different race, then I would be very anxious. Basically, I would always have that on me. It's just a slight difference, one of those things you've got to think about.